Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice licking boots. Barbara Lee said that there needs to be a ceasefire in Gaza. Her Democratic colleagues apparently don't like that. Now this is going on with the backdrop of the California Senate race. Adam Schiff is the leader in the polls, with Katie Porter a close second. Some Republican who used to be a baseball player is in third place, and Barbara Lee is dead last among the field. Now, she doesn't have any real chance to win Dianne Feinstein's old seat, but what gets me is that yet again, when these bought and paid for bootlicks are on a stage somewhere, they make it a point to advocate for everybody except us. They don't mention black people or anything for us, and this infuriates me because our condition is no better than any of these other people who they're advocating for. In fact, it's actually far worse. And yet they remain fearless in demanding a ceasefire for people on the other side of the globe who they don't know, never met, and who aren't even able to vote for them. But as for black people, they say nothing, or they lie and claim that they've done all kinds of things for us when they did nothing. That's important because the roly-poly Martins, the Mark Lamont Shills, and others will say, well, it's a matter of these other groups get things because they got money or because of their voting bloc. No. They get things because there is an unwritten but fiercely enforced rule in the United States. You don't do anything for black people no matter what. Black people are the only ones who can put you in office. So what? Don't do anything for them. The Democrats said that. They even wrote it down. And what Barbara Lee is doing is no different than what Karen Bass did in LA, totally putting aside any pretense that she represents black people and going all in for every non-black constituency you can name. You never see other politicians doing that. They go hard in the paint for whatever community they come from. And they also make it a point to ignore us, no matter how numerous our votes may be. All these other groups get more and better representation from so-called black politicians than we do. They're clearly very eager to get non-black votes because the white donors they want the money from and the Democratic bosses in D.C. who they want power and positions from demand it. As they see it, black voters are their biggest problem. Because we are telling them we want things that require them to say things putting pressure on white power, and they've determined not to do that. Reminds me of that Israeli woman in that documentary, The Lobby USA. She said the young black people were the biggest problem that Israel faced. She didn't say it was Hamas or Hezbollah, but young black people. And the congressional black talkers and the rest of these clout-chasing sellouts, they think the same thing. These scumbags actually wonder why black voters are turning their backs on them. I told you months ago that AIPAC was going to chastise members of the Congressional Black Caucus and how the Democratic leadership was allowing it. They are targeting black politicians to run them out of office because apparently they're not sufficiently obedient. After all, you can't have team mascots biting the hand that feeds them. In that The Lobby USA documentary, that Israeli woman, she was part of the Atlanta consul for the Israeli government, and here she was on video saying she had had private dinners with people she called black leaders.
I had last week a dinner, sit-down dinner at my house for 40 people, which are considered the leadership of the black community, and it's very important people. They can be part of our doing an activity.
Now, she doesn't name who they are, but do we really need to guess? How many of them are the same Negroes who AIPAC is angry at right now? There's white politicians and Hispanic ones and even a couple of Arab politicians who are making murmurs against the war in Gaza. But the Israelis are aiming their guns at the black politicians. They're not deciding we're going to wholesale run out all of these Hispanic politicians, or all the white ones, or all the Arab ones. They're like us, the black ones who we want to purge. Same way that when you had that gay marriage state referendum get passed in California years back, people like Rachel Maddow were blaming black voters for it having passed. They didn't do anything to stop the ethnic cleansing, gentrification of black voters from the state. And it happened in Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco and also in the Democrat stronghold of LA, where black people were being run out and continue to be run out to this present day. They oversee the wholesale purging of black residents from California and then got the nerve to turn around and blame black voters for not stopping a gay marriage law. They never blame white voters for these things. It's always the black ones who they single out, and it's always in the framework of, well, these black people, they should know better. They're supposed to, black people have been mistreated, so they should put on the cape for everybody. Meanwhile, if they were talking about non-black voters, the entire conversation would be, well, what do the Democrats need to do to appeal to these voting blocs over here to get them to vote the right way? On the other hand, with the black community, you niggers just need to vote the way we tell you to. You're supposed to know better than that. You're not supposed to disobey us. They don't offer anything. There's no incentives. No carrots, only sticks. And now you got the current Congresswoman and aspiring Senate hopeful Barbara Lee, who has fallen into criticism from her own party. Now, out in California, they're having double knockouts brawling over who's going to get Dianne Feinstein's seat. Isn't it interesting how these people spend untold millions of dollars just so they can get a government job that only pays about $174,000 a year? But I digress. And I consider it to be poetically ironic that these people are squabbling over Dianne Feinstein's seat. Feinstein did absolutely nothing for black people, not in California or nationwide, and these current contenders are vowing to do less than nothing. Unless you think that Barbara Lee's failure to actually advocate for black people during that Senate debate was some sort of coincidence, Barbara Lee made some quickie headlines recently when she showed up at a House subcommittee hearing about U.S.-Cuba relations. Now, she's not a member of that subcommittee, but she just showed up out of the blue, and the Hispanic woman who chairs that committee kicked her out. Again, we see these black politicians putting on the cape for non-blacks and going to the mat for them, but doing nothing for us, not even speaking up for us. These people staged a so-called sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives after a gay nightclub shooting. They scream and yell at House hearings over the treatment of illegal minors on the border. In Tennessee, they disrupted a hearing of the state legislature because they were demanding gun control. You had Jamal Bowman, who decided to pull the fire alarm in the House during session, and now Barbara Lee's making a moderate fool of herself over Cuba. And before anyone asks, yes, I'm well aware that the entire brouhaha about Cuba is because you have certain white Latinos who used to be the upper class of Cuba 60 years ago, and then Castro came along, overthrew the U.S.-backed Batista regime, and those privileged white Latinos lost their status, and they were forced to flee because they weren't about to work for a living. Now, we can't exactly heap praise on Castro either. Not only because Afro-Cubans didn't see any significant change in their lives after he took power, at least not as a group, but also because Afro-Cubans come to the U.S. and they identify as white, or most of the time, they just don't have anything to do with us at all. So it makes absolutely no sense for a black American politician with a black constituency to decide that she's going to get in front of the cameras and do some attention-whoring stunt because she wants to stick up for Cuba. We don't have a dog in this fight, and neither does Barbara Lee, but this is the Obama strategy here. It's where a Democrat makes it a point to get into meaningless squabbles with Republicans during House committee hearings or some subcommittee hearing or other in front of the cameras, always in order to enhance their own public image so that they can get to higher office. Kamala Harris did the same thing after she got elected to the Senate, where she was constantly bickering and arguing with officials from the Trump administration, and it was obvious to everyone, or at least to me, that she was trying to position herself for a presidential run, which was exactly what she was doing. This is the cheap and easy way to try to get yourself some quickie headlines. By the way, did I mention Barbara Lee is running for the Senate? Now, in case you didn't know, Barbara Lee is supposed to be representing Oakland. The same Oakland that Kamala Harris was DA of back in the day, but like Kamala, the only thing Lee is representing is herself. But the point of this morning's briefing is that regardless of how Lee has worked tirelessly to distance herself from even appearing to advocate for black people, including her own constituents, she has nonetheless run afoul of white power for the kind of empty rhetoric that non-black politicians get to do all the time. Now let's get one thing clear. These Negroes in D.C. are firmly in the hip pockets of these lobbyists and their donors. The problem is that in places like, say, California, these black social climbers have probably seen a lot of young people saying that they disagree with the war in Gaza and wishing something was done about it. But the problem here is black voters scream a hell of a lot louder when it comes to our tangibles and our safety, and you don't see any of these Negroes like Barbara Lee disrupting any House committee hearings about that at all. So if you have a couple of people making murmurs about Gaza, which I guess she figured was an issue noisy enough to get her some quickie headlines, oh, she'll jump out a window over that. She'll do anything that it takes to get attention for it. But black people demanding just the bare minimum, she ain't going nowhere for that, not even putting out a press release. The reason that she's sitting here talking about Gaza is because she's trying to appeal to a non-black audience. She's hoping that there's a whole bunch of white hipsters, white voters, middle-class white women and such who hopefully she can get the attention and support of. One thing's for sure, she's not getting to the Senate solely with black votes, but as far as she's concerned, she would prefer not to have to depend on black votes at all. because black votes have too many demands that would get in way of the donations and the campaign and committee positions that she's hoping that these white power brokers will give her. AIPAC is reported to be devoting $100 million to going after politicians who aren't sufficiently obedient to the Israeli government, and they put the crosshairs squarely on black politicians. Now, for AIPAC to let this plan slip into the white media, that makes what they're doing into a high-risk gamble, because if it doesn't pan out, well, they get shown as a paper tiger. Of course, that doesn't mean that the same black bootlicks will suddenly begin standing up for black people, though it does mean that in the future, the Israelis might have to give more campaign contributions to them. But notice that these black politicians are constantly willing to risk it all for non-black groups, issues, and interests. They stick up for illegal aliens, doing PR stunts, yelling at House committee hearings, and they're jumping out a window to protect Palestinians, again, people who aren't even citizens and cannot even vote for them. Look, you can feel any way you want about what's going on in Gaza, but you don't have to go to Palestine to find people who are being killed with impunity by a racist apartheid regime. You got plenty of black people who are being oppressed and murdered with impunity right now. The Congressional Black Caucus is a crappy social club. That's why they can't even come together as a group to protect one another. Why do we refuse to become bootlicks? It's because this is what we would have to do. When you make that devil's bargain to crawl on your belly for a few pennies from white power, this is what you have to sign up for. You have to willingly take their abuse. You have to be their willing crash dummy when Biden needs someone to lie for him and falsely claim that his 94 crime bill had nothing to do with the orgy of mass incarceration that followed. And when white power thinks you're not being sufficiently obedient, you have to be their willing punching bag too. With AIPAC targeting almost entirely black politicians, shouldn't the congressional black talkers be saying that it's time to cut Israel's foreign aid? Isn't it time to go ahead and return fire? It's time for something across the bow, something big and noisy to let them know. You come after our jobs, we will come after your little empire out there. But they're not doing that at all. Why? Because getting donations from the Israeli government is only part of how they keep people in line. What they also do is make sure that there's going to be corporate patronage jobs. Do you think those free vacations over to the beach in Tel Aviv are only for members of Congress? No, they make sure that their family members get included too. Not necessarily with those congressional jaunts, but they still make sure that it happens. The Israelis have plenty of political liabilities and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. What they don't have is anyone who's willing to exploit those vulnerabilities. Not even the people they're targeting, people who have nothing to lose by taking them on. The bootlick has no decency, no self-respect, and no dignity. That's the reason why they have no problem being the willing targets of all of this humiliation, public humiliation, time and time again. When you're a bootlick, that's what you have to sign up for. You got to get used to eating a crap sandwich and learning to like the taste. Now, as black people, we have absolutely no business being a power base for sellouts and suck-ups. What we require are candidates from our own ranks, people who we chose because they've already determined in advance that they're dedicated to what's in our interest. This will require us to fund them, work for them, and to keep an eye on them afterwards to make sure they don't break bad on us. We may not be able to shower riches and glory on them, but we can give them the one thing that all of the white money in the world can't give them: votes. You see, a bankroll can do a lot of things, but the one thing that all of the campaign donations in the world can't do is to actually walk into a voting booth and pull the lever and or push a button for a candidate. You need people to do that. And without votes, you're not getting into office. We are the swing vote. And when it comes to a swing vote, you use it one of two ways. You either find somebody who is actually going to be working in your interest so that you can vote for them, or if you don't find anything like that on the ballot, you withhold your vote. Because there's always someone who's calculating that just by dumb luck, you'll be silly enough to show up and vote because you feel it's your civic duty. Voting is a good thing, it has its place, but not if it's against your interest. Withholding our vote from political con men who we know won't do anything for us is only part of the equation. At some point, we will have to start to step into these arenas and impose our will on them. Now, when that happens, you can expect to see the same Barbara Lee and others who you've seen disrupting committee hearings eagerly, or people like Jamal Bowman pulling the fire alarm to interrupt a congressional session. You can see all these people who AIPAC has been taking aim at and vowing they're going to run them out of office. They'll be the same ones who will be attacking black people who are actually in office to advocate for us. they'll be calling whoever we put into office divisive and repeating all of the white media's lines, and you know what? That's good, because they'll only do it right up until their white benefactors use their money to put them out, or until we organize our votes to drive them out. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Charlie, Jacques Hargett, Bobby Williams, Rowan Wings, and Andre Evans. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.